the recording. It's going to take just a moment for YouTube to get up. And I'll welcome everyone, do an announcement or two, and then turn it over to Chinenye. Great. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Materials and Manufacturing Seminar. So as a reminder, as I mentioned last time, we will not have a seminar on December 15 because there was a seminar during the break between A and B terms. We'll go by kind of the original schedule for B term, not the newly modified one. And of course, with the Thanksgiving break, will start next Wednesday, so we will not have a seminar next Wednesday either. So after today, we will next see you on December 1. And we've had a change in the schedule there as well. We will have David Furr from Pratt & Whitney, who will join us instead of Brajendra Mishra. So with that, Chinenye, go ahead and present your slide and start the introduction, and then I'll put up Laura's slides afterwards.
Sure. Okay, so all right. So thank you very much, Laura, for joining us, and it's an honor to do the introduction. So Laura, we have today Laura Teicher, and she's the Executive Director at Forge, a 501c3 nonprofit, helping innovators navigate the journey from physical prototype through to commercialization and impact at scale. Her background includes several years of leadership in innovation and impact-oriented organizations. Before joining, before joining Forge, she served as the Executive Director at the Boston chapter of TIE, the largest global not-for-profit network dedicated to fostering entrepreneurship. Laura holds an MBA from Boston University and currently serves on the board of directors for Climate Exchange, as well as advisory board for Net Impact Boston, the Boston University Radio, and SXSW Pitch. And with that, I would hand it over to Laura and see you all at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Excited for this talk. And I'm going to be covering a little bit about the innovation ecosystem in general, quite a bit about the work that we do at Forge, because I believe it's relevant to this audience. And in fact, if I may ask, if folks are listening, if you don't mind throwing in the chat, perhaps where you're coming from or what you're working on or what interested you about this talk. The more I know about you, the more I can make sure I'm talking about what's relevant to you. As was shared, my background is primarily in innovation and impact leadership. And I'm well aware that I am presenting to a technical group of people about all of the technical work that we support at Forge. My own background is not technical. I did not study manufacturing or engineering. Luckily at Forge, we have a great team of folks that do have that technical expertise, and we have a broad network of technical experts that we work with as well. So you've already heard our mission at Forge, and it's really helping innovators with physical products on this journey from prototype to impact. I've been the executive director here for 3 years, and I'm excited to tell you a bit more about what we're doing at Forge, how it fits into the ecosystem, and what the impact is. It's some great stories about some of the really incredible startups and innovators that we've been privileged to help along the way. So we covered our mission, but I do like to emphasize as a nonprofit, if there are any innovators in the room, we have to date never charged innovators for anything. We don't take equity. We're just here to help. It's our mission to really help these startups get from prototype to commercialization. And what's unique at Forge, and this is relevant when you talk about the innovation ecosystem, is that we are very laser focused on manufacturing. We ensure that the startups and innovators that come to us are really ready to engage with manufacturers post-prototype. We do a lot of training. We offer resources like workshops, factory tours, office hours, product development sessions. We offer non-dilutive funding to help on that product development journey. And we really are here to help accelerate that manufacturing readiness. And then we have a robust network of local manufacturers and suppliers that we've vetted as innovation friendly, that we help connect the startups to with a warm introduction, which makes a really big difference, so that they can not only get their products made at scale faster, but they can do it in a hyper-local way. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that matters, the advantages that can lie within local production that I think not everyone is aware of, and the impact, not just for the startups, but for the ecosystem in Massachusetts and New England and the US when we're able to localize our supply chains. So a little bit of anchoring, just what this means in terms of outcomes and impacts and metrics. To date, at Forage, we've served well over 400 startups. This is over the course of several years. And they have a really incredible over 90% startup survival rate. And if folks in the room aren't aware of typical startup survival rates, they're usually quoted at about 10 to 20%, depending on who you're reading and what survey you're looking at. But especially when it comes to physical products, when it comes to hardware, things that need to be made and manufactured, the survival rate is actually typically even lower. So over several years and hundreds of startups, this over 90% survival rate is really a meaningful indicator that support specifically around manufacturing makes a huge difference. And part of this is because when you're making a physical product, it is more capital intensive upfront. You have to spend more money to build things. And you can't, as is so common with software, have this focus on failing fast and iterating and having 500 different versions. If you had 500 different versions of a physical product, you would probably go out of business because of the cost of that. So intervening, making sure that startups are on the right path in terms of readiness and materials, routing them to the right types of processes for their volumes, it really can make or break their ability to extend their runway, find the right partners, and scale up so they can really have impact in the marketplace. I think it's also important to note, because I think there is some interest in the general lay of the land of the ecosystem. When I first took my initial first ever executive director role at TI Boston, I tried to start mapping out the innovation ecosystem in the region. And I created an Excel spreadsheet and I shared it with all my partners and friends. And every time we thought of or found a new innovation support organization, we'd add it. We got up to, I think, close to 400 organizations in Greater Boston alone. Unfortunately, because that was a document I shared, at some point it got accidentally deleted, or I would share it with you all because I think it's really helpful. But it's really good anchoring to know just how robust the ecosystem is. And yet no one else is laser focused on manufacturing like Forage and on physical products. There are some organizations that have more of a physical product bent, but Forage, we're not what you would typically refer to as an incubator or an accelerator. We're not asking startups to move in with us. We're not asking them to take 5 courses and then graduate. We're just here when the startups need help. And I think this has really helped us to be adding meaningful value for each startup when they need it without a lot of barriers to entry. We're really proud that we've served roughly 40% minority-led startups because we're not asking for upfront money. We know capital is hard to unlock for certain demographics. You know, it's a lot easier to fundraise if you looked like the fundraisers, and it's a challenge in the ecosystem. So we're really committed to not charging, not having inefficient barriers to engaging, just meeting the startups where they're at, helping them get ready to manufacture, helping them connect to the local supply chain. And that has resulted in over 31 million in known contracts and purchase orders to make innovative products locally. This is a tip of the iceberg number because it is unfortunately not always the easiest to track down that contract value, but we know we're really helping companies bring their product to market and do it locally. And I'll talk more about the advantages of doing it locally later in this presentation. So again, I always like to emphasize over and over, we do this for free for the startups, because I know sometimes it sounds almost too good to be true. And I want you to know that if you're working on an innovation and you want to reach out to Forge, we are not going to charge you. We help startups prepare to manufacture, source supply chains locally. And what we include in supply chain really is broader than just manufacturing. We work with design firms, initial prototyping shops, parts and fabrication. We also are there for the startups to keep coming back to as they grow. So we have a lot of folks in network that can help with production at volume and manufacturing at scale. And there are a number of other things that are included in the supply chain that people might not initially think of. So I'm going to use a couple slides just to really anchor understanding of the breadth of where Forge can help, in case we can help any of you. So why we do what we do. As I said earlier, manufactured innovation faces unique challenges. And unfortunately, I shared a little bit about my ecosystem mapping earlier. Almost all of those organizations, not all, but almost all, have a little bit of a software orientation. There's something called the Lean Business Canvas. There are a lot of practices that are common in supporting startups that really are designed, again, for that rapid iteration and failing fast mentality that is anchored in software. And this is partially because software scales faster. It costs less upfront. You can fail fast and scale, and you can get that 10x, even 40x growth that is a lot more challenging when you're building something physical. So we're offering a unique focus, and there's a reason why not everyone focuses on it, because it's frankly harder. But we've seen that this support on the manufacturing side can really make or break a startup success. With the physical product, part of why it's helpful to have this local network of suppliers and manufacturers is actually driving to the factory, seeing the prototype come off the line, seeing the short runs, looking and sharing and touching and feeling the product really helps with communication. And it's just not the same as showing the back end of your code. Preparing to engage with manufacturers and suppliers and finding the right fit partner before Forge could be challenging. So we work with a lot of innovators who have advanced degrees and totally new product ideas that are going to really be game changers for the world, but they actually haven't worked with manufacturers before. And there really is a language to it. There are best practices to it. And it can be tough to get traction with a manufacturer through cold outreach. So the fact that Forge represents this portfolio of startups with such a high survival rate and such high preparedness makes Forge startups more appealing to the suppliers and manufacturers. We kind of leverage our reputation to build these connections. So a quick overview of what types of innovators we work with. One of our largest segments at Forge is clean tech and climate tech. And this is in part because we were initially formed at Greentown Labs, which is the largest climate tech incubator in North America. They are still our sister organization, and we do maintain an office there, but we are a fully separate organization. Nevertheless, we're their go-to for their referrals for manufacturing support, but we're also getting referrals from across the universities and the other incubators and accelerators in the ecosystem. Because again, we're the one organization that's laser focused on manufacturing. So you'll see there's a significant chunk of medical device and diagnostics, a lot of consumer products. I think it's really important to emphasize that we're not just deep tech, we're not just hard tech. We work with food packaging, and we had one company that was making Frisbees. If it needs to be made, we can help. And you can see the breadth of the types of startups that we engage with here. I'll tell some stories about some examples to illustrate later in this presentation. So why manufacturing here matters. At Forge, we believe if you can invent it locally, you should be empowered to make it locally. It really does offer some unique competitive advantages that, in my experience, innovators aren't necessarily aware of when they first come to us. There's often an assumption that something has to go overseas, and sometimes it does. and there is nothing wrong with that. But we're here to help unlock the advantages of working locally. So again, meeting face-to-face, reviewing the design, having more transparent relationships and IP protection and, common communication norms, reducing travel expenses. There are a lot of costs to working overseas that you don't see up front in terms of shipping and tariffs and management fees. So it might look cheaper up front, and it may ultimately be cheaper depending on what it is, but it may not be because of these hidden fees. So we try to really help startups understand the strengths and the weaknesses of doing it locally so they can make informed decisions, and then give them a number of partners they can choose to work with if they want to. Next slide, please. Very importantly, what we're doing at Forge feels more relevant than ever in the face of the global supply chain disruptions we've been experiencing. I don't know who else here has experienced them. I know I went to the bookstore this weekend and they were out of bags. I went to the grocery store and they had a sign up saying, "Be patient, we're restocking things." There have been a number of things contributing to global supply chain disruptions. Folks on this call may be aware of things like the shipping containers getting backed up at different ports, especially in the Suez Canal. That was a really big one. The COVID-related shutdowns and shifts in capacity and supply and demand. But we're hearing from a lot of startups that their lead times have gone from a couple of weeks to even a couple of years, depending on where they're sourcing. And so that is compounded when you do have to ship things across the world. So right now, sourcing locally has become a really critical risk management strategy for a lot of companies. And we're seeing a trend in onshoring and reshoring. Again, unexpected tariffs and out-of-country shipping, there can be some surprise costs going overseas. And then one thing that I've been surprised, frankly, that a lot of our impact-oriented startups aren't necessarily thinking about up front is just the pure social impact aspects of sourcing locally, including a reduced carbon footprint, because you're not shipping things back and forth across the world in the same way. So there are a lot of advantages to making it here. Again, absolutely, many of our startups, if not most of them, are sourcing certain things internationally, and that is something that we are supportive of. We just can't facilitate. And we try to facilitate doing it locally when it makes sense for the startups. So a little bit about where we engage at Forge. You heard me at the very beginning and saw our mission a couple times. We engage from prototype through to commercial scale. And there's something called a manufacturing readiness level, because I know we have a lot of technical folks tuning in right now. You may be familiar with this scale that was initially created by the Department of Defense. We have a Forge adapted version of the manufacturing readiness level. So this is really an internal metric. It models after the DoD version, but it's not nearly as intense. The DoD MRL scale is, as you can imagine, is pretty complex, and it can take a very long time to get along that scale. But what we ask for from any innovator that's trying to engage with us is to at least have an early prototype. And that can be a looks like prototype, that can be a works like prototype, but seeing at least a model of what it could be is really essential to our ability to bring in the right resources and supports. So when it's still at the napkin sketch stage or the ideation stage, we do have startups come to us. We have a no startup or no innovator left behind mentality at Forge. So we always try to refer them to some of those hundreds of other organizations in the ecosystem. But we really shine once there's at least an early prototype. And then we're with these startups, they keep coming back to us as they scale, all the way through total commercialization. So about 20% of that over 400 startups we've worked with is actually in low volume production or full scale production. And they'll still come back to us when they need a new process or a new partner. And again, because I know we have technical folks tuning in, here's another way to sort of look at these phases that I discussed and map them across some other ways of describing product design phases and product development phases that may or may not be more familiar to some folks on the line. So we're really engaging around alpha and beta prototypes, feasibility and development at a minimum, but then all the way through launch and scale and production. And in case any of you want to come and work with Forge, the way it works is we have a standard onboarding process. And out of that, we give you a mixture of educational opportunities and curated connections, depending on what you're looking for. And then we follow up, and often you follow up with us. And 75% of startups and innovators that we work with continue to return to Forge for future support, which I think is a testament to the fact that they're seeing value in working with us. So what is a supplier? It really, again, encompasses a lot more than some folks initially assume. I think a lot of people immediately go to sheet metal or plastics, and we certainly do a lot of that. But our supplier network also includes testing and certification, engineering and design, assembly, logistics and packaging, electromechanics, machining and forming, textiles, anything that you can think of that needs to be made. Forge is going to try to help with that. And our network is growing every single day as the startup requests are accelerating, and we're pushed to expand our network so we can meet them where they're needing support. A little more on labeling and testing requirements. There's so many different kinds of testing and labeling and certifications. In my experience, a lot of innovators start thinking about this a little bit later than they should. So if you are working on a product and it's going to be something that people are eating, or a medical device that goes in someone's body, or even a fan that has blades that could hurt someone if it's approached incorrectly, you may be required to have some testing, some certification, some approvals. It varies depending on what market you're going into. And the sooner you think about that in your design process, the less bad surprises they're going to be down the line when you've already gone through some iterations and have to backtrack so that you can actually get that certification. Forge can help with that. Others in our network: product design firms, design for manufacturing, user interface, CAD, IP protection resources, third-party logistics. And I just like to really beat this so that folks really know we can help all across the supply chain. So now I'm going to tell some startup stories, and I think this is one of the most fun parts for me and hopefully for the audience to hear about some of the great innovators that we've worked with at Forge. And this first example is a startup called QuickCord. Now, Forge has offices in a few different places in the state, including in Western Massachusetts. And this is one of our Western Mass success stories. QuickCord is a veteran-founded startup that we've been working with since they had a works-like prototype. And this is really illustrative of what that means at Forge. They took a toilet paper roll and they wrapped it in duct tape and they put a hole in it and they demonstrated to us, this is how we are going to be streamlining, pulling out paracord. And we were able to engage with them at that level. So please don't feel like the prototype thing is too prohibitive. We've helped people screw together pieces of wood to show us what they're trying to do. And these folks first engaged with us at the toilet paper roll stage. We very quickly helped them with the design to get closer to a more formal prototype. We took them on factory tours in Western Mass so they could see different suppliers they might want to work with in injection molding and manufacturing and assembly. And today they have this product. You can see it in the upper right of the slide. It is beautifully designed. It no longer looks like a toilet paper roll. And what this does is it actually empowers military men and women in the field to pull out this power cord that it turns out they're very dependent on for certain situations without dealing with tangling. And you can imagine how scary it would be to have a critical piece of equipment tangled when you're out in the field. It's also become quite popular with outdoorsmen. And so they are not only in production, but they're post-revenue. And now they're in a partnered effort with Forge to launch our pilot mentor network in Western Mass for scale-up ready startups, because they've demonstrated traction. We've been with them from toilet paper roll through to traction and sales. And now we're trying to help them think about the next step to really full scale. So this is a great success story where we've been with them from the very beginning, and they've sourced almost all of their product and manufacturing right in Western Mass, right next door to them. And they've been quite vocal about the value of that. Another company here, Believe. This is a medical device company. This was founded by a young man who is very eloquent and open about the fact that he himself struggled with addiction to opioids and wanted to create a solution for everyone who deals with this pain. I think folks probably know that this is actually a really common problem today. And so you can see the device right in the middle, and it's meant to control distribution of controlled substances. And it connects to an app that a patient can have access for their physician or their family or whoever they need to help them monitor their drug use. So this is another company that has availed themselves of quite a lot of forage programming and resources. We've helped connect them to discrete manufacturers like cable assembly, electronics, design for manufacturing. They've participated in a number of our events like rocket pitches, which is when we put startups in front of a panel of relevant manufacturing and supplier judges to give sort of rapid fire feedback and support around their manufacturing challenges. I like to refer to it as more dolphin tank style than Shark Tank style. So if you ever participate, no, it's not scary. It's just meant to help really accelerate that product development. And I think this is a really impactful product addressing a true need in society that we've been excited to support, and a good example of a medical device we've worked with. 1854 is building bikes, and they have a really thoughtful business model where this is really meant as a social good product. So the folks that are employed for the actual assembly are formerly incarcerated people, particularly women. And the hope is through offering training and employment in building these bikes that it helps address recidivism. What's really interesting about this is you see a bike, but we can't quite see in this image is that one of the main areas we engaged with them around is their need for a HDMI display and user interface on the front of the bike. They have a number of bicycles that are for you and me, but they also have bicycles that they're actually deploying with police to help them communicate better with communities. So that interface is really important. It allows them to access real-time information about resources that they can share with the community, like mental health resources, homeless shelters, and it's really meant to be a play to help ensure that police are offering needed community support and engaging in a positive way with the community. And the name 1854 is a reference to the group that assembled in 1854 on July 4th to protest the fact that we're in a country that was celebrating Independence Day when there was still active slavery and racism happening. And so there are deep roots for this company in anti-poverty and in social justice. And yes, there are all the parts that go into the bicycle, but we've been especially engaged in that interface between the physical bicycle and the software that helps connect the police to the community in a positive way. So 2 more stories. Hala Technologies is a great example of a company that we've been engaged with since they spun out of a university, and they had 0 manufacturing experience, but they had this incredible IP to help revolutionize the future of decentralized energy generation, which is a mouthful. One way I like to describe it is they're building the brain for microgrids, which if folks are interested in climate tech and climate resiliency, this is an important aspect of future healthy, clean energy generation. And so when they came to us, they had this out of this world IP and no physical products yet. and they needed the control box because you can't be the brain of the microgrid without plugging in to the microgrid. So they would say their core product is the IP. This HELA device you see circled in the middle is needed to make it work. And we deal with a lot of products like that might not call themselves hardware primarily or physical product primarily, but in order to deal with some of the toughest challenges in the world, you have to engage with the world and connect with the world. And so they came to us with their IP. We helped them source every single piece of that box, I believe, over time. And one of my favorite stories to tell about HELA, who remains a close friend of Forge today, even though they have a tremendous amount of traction, they still come back to us for help, is that when the wildfires first started hitting in California, they had a pilot out in California. And there are a number of microgrid pilots out in California at this time. Theirs was the only one that remained partially functioning, even as it was hit by wildfires, because their IP helps it adjust and shut down parts that are affected and optimize parts that are unaffected. And so that's a real world application of why this matters and why this is going to be important to a resilient energy system in the future. One more. I'm not going to talk too much about BioBot myself. And you can see on the left here, we do have a bunch of Forge impact stories. So if you want to read more about these startups or other startups, it's all on our website. BioBot is again, they would call themselves more an IP company or a public health company, but they are sending robots into our sewers to collect aggregated anonymous public health data. And when we first engaged with them, they had their alpha prototypes and they were sampling from the sewers, and the application was addressing the opioid crisis. But when COVID hit, they pivoted. And part of why they were ready to pivot is we had engaged with them in getting through to their beta and their gamma prototypes. We helped them ruggedize those prototypes, make them shock-proof, corrosion-proof. We gave them money and partners to do that with. And so when COVID hit and they pivoted to analyzing wastewater for early instances of COVID, they had those products that were really ready to be deployed at scale in the sewers. And if we can just play this video real quick, I think this tells the story better than I can. And you've been listening to me for quite some time. Oops, it does have sound. And if that's not going to work, I can tell the story. Thought I'd give you a break from me speaking. Sorry about that. And this video that we're hopefully going to be able to watch is from 2020. So they've come even further since then, and they're actually deployed in, I believe, every single state in the country, helping us with early detection of COVID today. And if the sound isn't working, we can move on. I don't want to cause stress or delays for anyone. And I can maybe send it as a follow-up because it's a fun feature that they did on Comedy Central. Oh.
BioBot Analytics CEO Mariana Mattis joins us right now.
The power of this technology is that we can repeat again and again, every few days to then get that early warning if there's any second wave coming in a particular area.
BioBot is based on a very simple concept. Everybody pees and poops every day. We know that waste contains a rich source of information on our health and our well-being. Our doctors look at it all the time to understand things that are going on inside your body, but every day we're flushing this information down the toilet. So at BioBot, we're collecting samples at the wastewater treatment facility in our cities.
Here's how it works. This machine collects wastewater once an hour for 24 hours. Then the island's lab prepares the samples and sends them out. Results come back in about 3 days.
The beauty of wastewater as a diagnostic is that everybody has a voice in the sewer. As long as your house is connected to the wastewater, your information is counted.
Whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic, whether they have access to molecular tests or not. So it's a much more egalitarian or unbiased way to survey levels of virus in the greater community. It's sort of like looking into a crystal ball in the shape of a toilet.
The
The company initially used its technology to study opioid use, but is now providing COVID testing for about 400 facilities in 42 states across the country.
Sewage isn't just giving a more accurate portrait of current cases. It's also helping officials get ahead of outbreaks.
Moreover, we know that infected individuals are excreting the virus within days of being infected. So that's many days before they're presenting with clinical symptoms. And so that really makes sewage a really good leading indicator of new cases.
Why isn't it something that we should just be doing constantly in every city?
We imagine that in the future, every city in the US and in the world will have this type of infrastructure and this type of technology in place.
So that is a wrap on how much I'm going to share about BioBot analytics in this presentation, but I know we'll have some time for Q&A later in case anyone wants to ask about any of these startups or anything else at Forge, or that I can answer about the broader ecosystem or my pathway to be here as well. I think I have a few more slides and then we'll be shifting to Q&A. Just an example of some of the events that we hold. We've been mostly virtual since the pandemic started, although we did have some in-person events outside over the summer. We have weekly product development sessions, factory tours, educational and training events, an annual showcase, supplier and investor office hours, access to grant opportunities. If you need help with a physical product, reach out, and if we can't give it to you, we'll try to make sure we send you into the right place to get that support. And we can share, maybe I can pop these live links in the chat later or in a follow-up email. But this is how you can register that kind of intake process at Forge, is those product development sessions with our senior program manager. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter, just monthly, very rare for us to send additive email blasts. So don't worry, you're gonna get super spammed. And there's our website address too, if you just want to look at more success stories or upcoming events or information about the team. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Laura. That was very insightful. And I'm sure it will be helpful for those that are thinking of pushing their innovations to startups. So at this point, do we have any questions from the audience? Okay. Okay, Professor Powell, go ahead.
Right. So the Lean Business Canvas is a very widespread tool for putting together a business kind of a business plan on a sheet of paper. I'm wondering, you referred to it as being kind of software centric, and I'm wondering what kind of changes or differences would you propose that we use for manufacturing startups?
It's a great question. So there's a component of that and a lot of other common startup best practices that emphasizes building an MVP, getting rapid customer feedback, and then iterating on that design and doing that continuously and fast and furious the very beginning. With physical products, this is not at all to say that you shouldn't be talking to your customers. You absolutely should, especially because it's very expensive sometimes to build physical product. You need that input. You have to be a little more efficient in your iterations. If you have, again, say 100 iterations, which wouldn't be unusual with some software, it is likely to put you out of business unless you have really great upfront funding or deep pockets yourself. It's just expensive to do multiple builds. So you need to do a lot more customer discovery upfront. Works like and looks like prototypes can help, an initial prototype can help, but that extreme focus on iteration, like getting the product out as fast as possible and then iterating over and over and over, doesn't quite translate. And that's a big part of what is taught in a lot of entrepreneurial support organizations and models.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Talk a lot about local. Do you have a definition of what you consider local? Like as a distance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So currently Forge is only operating in Massachusetts. And what that means is that our manufacturing and supplier network is mostly in Massachusetts and New England. Now, what that doesn't mean is that there are any prohibitions on where the innovators or the startups are coming from. Because the support we're offering is pretty unique, we're actually at this point not only receiving inbound requests from across the country, but across the world. And what we try to do is be very upfront that while we can help with the education and the preparation, our manufacturing and supply chain referrals are going to be predominantly in New England. And when we make those referrals, if someone is based in Massachusetts or New England, we're actually going to have a bias towards making sure at least one of those referrals is as physically close as possible. So there are about 7,000 manufacturers in Massachusetts alone. And if you're looking for something like sheet metal, which is in abundance in Western Massachusetts, we can actually say, well, here's one that does the volumes you need, but also here's one that's just one town over from you that you may want to talk to as well.
Wow. Any other questions from anyone? Professor Powell?
I always defer to students, but I always have a bunch as well. So yeah, this community is in materials and manufacturing. I'm wondering if, manufacturing is of course what you do, but I'm wondering if there are any startups that you've helped in either new materials or new materials manufacturing processes that you can talk about, because this can face unique challenges.
We absolutely have. One of the things I do to be very careful about IP, which intellectual property, as you know, is really important to startups, is I don't talk about startups unless we've published a success story on them that they've approved. So the answer is yes, but I don't want to get too specific because we haven't actually published any stories. I don't have permission. There's one really cool textile startup that we've worked with, without naming names, that has created kind of flexible electrical conductive fabrics. We also have, oh, there is one I can talk about that we've done a success story on. They're called AeroShield. And we've actually just awarded them funding at one of our showcase events just a year ago. Time is very different in pandemic times, but I did a podcast with them recently to check in as well. So AeroShield Materials, they have a very simple product. It is an improvement on prior aerogels. So typically the type of aerogel they're making is blue in color. And this aerogel is really good at insulating. And they had a breakthrough that actually means they can make it clear. And that means there are applications in window insulation. More recently, since we gave them Forge product development, they've also discovered an application in solar panels. So making sure that there's all of the light that can possibly come through the solar panel, the gas part coming through. So they take this aerogel and they put it in between the panes, and it makes the glass that they apply it to just much more energy efficient. And we did give them product development funding to help with that at one time. And that story is on the website.
That's great to hear. Do we have other questions from anyone? think this is where we'll wrap it up. I don't know, Professor Powell.
Sure, why not? So you mentioned this this aerogel company. It's really interesting. I think I don't know if they were one of the showcases mentioned at the Greentown Labs Climate Tech Summit.
I believe they were at the Climate Tech Summit. I was not there physically. Some of my team members were. I was watching it remotely, and I'm pretty sure they had a speaking gig that I didn't get to catch. But they are, you're right, they're a Greentown member and a Forge startup, which is not uncommon.
Okay, great. Well, along those lines, one of the themes for the seminar is sustainability. So are there some other similar stories or energy generation or transportation or related stories that you can tell?
Yes, you're challenging my mental catalog of published stories. Give me one moment. Clean tech does represent today about 40% of the Forge makeup, depending on how you define it. But we're including more efficient transportation, obviously energy generation and storage, solar, water tech, ag tech. I think we have an ag tech one that we've published. I think I would probably have to look at the website to double check which stories I can tell, which I apologize for.
Okay.
Oh, no, we just awarded grant funding to a startup called Gen H. They're doing hydropower. And so they are doing a very specific application of hydropower, which is converting existing small dam infrastructure to hydropower creation. And I wish I could remember the stat, but there are just a tremendous numbers of small dams in the US that are not currently creating hydropower. And they have created a modular kind of small scale, easily deployable design that just kind of goes right on those existing dams and turns it into a source of hydropower. So we just awarded them funding in September. And they're using that to improve on their product design. They do have some pilots going, but this isn't yet deployed across the country, but there's tremendous opportunity to harness that power across the country.
Great. Thank
I
you.
think we have a question. Aditya?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just had a question. Do suppliers ever end up investing in the startups they support?
That's a really good question. It depends, which I know is a common answer to many questions, especially I think when you're in school. I know it was when I was in school. We do have a couple of suppliers in network that actually do have corporate venture arms. So that's one example where you might see it. And we have other suppliers that are really doubled down on innovation and kind of trying to catch the next unicorn. So they'll go above and beyond and do things like, I was touring one of their factories recently, and one of our companies, who shall rename unnamed, has one of their later stage prototypes deployed at the factory to test it. So they're actually investing like their time and effort just testing it as users without giving any more detail about what it is. They're not actually receiving any tangible benefits, but there are different kinds of investments. And there are also some manufacturers and suppliers that are open to sort of unique financial deals as well. But by and large, that's not where we're seeing the investment coming from, just to not be misleading. By and large, it is coming from, honestly, a tremendous number of the innovators we work with get federal grants. So the average innovator that we're engaging with already has about 800K in funding, and a majority of that is often like SBIR and that sort of thing. That's partially a function of our strong relationship with the clean tech community and the intense R&D that goes into these clean tech products.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat. So would it be possible to share the example about the aerogel?
Oh, yeah. Let me find it.
Screen share.
What I'll do too is I'll throw in the chat just where all of our success stories are, if you don't mind me spending one moment navigating the website, and then I'll pull out that one specifically too.
Okay.
So let me pull up the chat. Here's where we publish all of our public success stories. And then let me navigate to AeroShield. And now I can cheat, Adam, if you have more story questions, because I have what's published up in front of me. Infinite Cooling is another great clean tech startup. They are capturing the steam plumes from industrial processes and recycling that water for a cooling effect. So it's sort of a closed system approach instead of losing all of that water and having even more energy and resource intensiveness pulling in other water to cool it. They're capturing it and flowing it back around the system and cooling, big industrial applications where you use kind of thermal separation. And there's typically a tremendous amount of steam being let off and resource wastage.
Great. I don't see any hands raised, so do you have other questions from the audience? Okay, Professor Powell, do we wrap it up here or give some more time for questions?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks. Thanks very much, Laura. I think the questions you've answered all of our questions. This is incredibly helpful. And 7,000 manufacturing companies in Massachusetts. Who knew? It's pretty remarkable. It's great to hear the 90% survival rate. But actually, I do have a question on that. How over what period are these are 90% of the startups surviving, and is there anything specific that you attribute that to? Because all kinds of things can go wrong as startups. So if there are things that you can talk about that that are particularly different to Forge clients, I guess, versus others.
Absolutely. I think there are a number of things. Of course, correlation does not equal causation, so we can't claim credit for all of it. But I do think that intervening around manufacturing is particularly impactful for these physical products. It is so common for me to have a conversation with an innovator that thinks they know what they need, and they say, I want to do this way. Can you connect me to these people? And we take that as an opportunity to say, great, we can. Have you considered this? It'll be half the cost at this volume. Or great, we can. But did you know this other process might be more in line with your business values? We don't start offering advice without understanding the full picture. So that intake process is really important, where we understand, what's the manufacturing budget? What are the specs? Oftentimes startups don't even have their specs figured out or their bill of materials. They may have it figured out, but not written down formally. So we can help with that as well. And so I think there's a common thread of innovators who are used to moving fast and furious on the merit of their own smart and grit, kind of jumping into manufacturing a little prematurely without being prepared, making really costly mistakes. We just hear horror stories about just wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars. One that really struck me was there was a startup who had their initial prototype, and again, this is so common with clean tech, just super large industrial scale. And they had done all this customer discovery. They found their market in India. I'm trying to make sure I don't give away too much detail without permission, but essentially they contracted a very fancy firm to do their first deployment, and it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they shipped it out to India, and it didn't fit where it needed to fit because they hadn't paused and had help double checking that. So they just blew hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if there had just been that added step of well, what really are the specifications? Where does this need to fit? And also, hey, you don't have to go with that super fancy, super expensive outfit. We could have saved a lot of pain. So I think that is one factor. We're definitely benefiting from an ecosystem effect. Like, as I spoke about at the beginning, it's so robust here. So a number of startups are finding us on their own now. Like we rebranded, we built out our website. It's exciting to see folks finding us from around the world, but a majority of startups are still being referred to us by what we call ecosystem collaborators. They're coming to us from Greentown, from Mass Challenge, Mass Robotics, the universities, and they're just often tapped into a number of other supports as well. What's interesting though, is that we have been operating since 2015, and now that we're getting more startups from outside of that ecosystem, the survival rate seems to be holding firm. However, let's give it another couple of years, and hopefully I'll be able to come back and say, yes, we were right. It's still holding up, but that has been durable since 2015, which is a pretty solid amount of time for at least the first couple hundred that came through back then.
Outstanding, terrific. All right, well, thanks very much once again. It's great to meet you, if not, actually, did I run into you at Climate Tech? I don't remember now, but.
I wasn't physically there, but I will say you
ran into a couple of
familiar
others.
face, so I think we may have bumped into each other in the ecosystem. Forge has been working more with WPI lately too. We're involved in the MERT 2.0 project together. So this is a follow-on to the Massachusetts emergency response that the state did when we had a PPE shortage. We collaborated on a big showcase in September. So, there's more and more interlinkage between Forge and WPI, which is really exciting. And I'm grateful that you've had me today.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much once again. All right. And yeah, I look forward to hearing some WPI startup success stories with in your Forge portfolio.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. All right. I'll say bye to everyone and end the meeting now. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.